Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Rock Show with Farrell. I proselytize. I don't know how you say the word, but I prophesize a deep age before us. Rock is going to sort itself out right now, and I think it's going to be marked by a much deeper, more introspective age, more philosophical in nature. I think there's an inherently existential overtone, too much of daily conversation, largely, I suppose, due to the advent of the internet, largely due to social media, in the way that's unfolded and kind of binded with the way we think about things and interact, largely in Western society, but the Eastern world is no, what's the word? Yeah, como se dice? They're no stranger to it. Cracking my jaw for you. Look at what I do for you people. Come on. No, but yeah. No, I proselytize a deep period. I think I have I don't know, a habit to look down and say I think, and then to be unsure of my statement. But I predict a deep age. I predict things to be much deeper. Prior to that, I look down again. That's my tell. If I was playing poker, you would know exactly what's in my hand. Nothing but the hand I was dealt. What can I say? Okay, no, I prophesize a deep age. I think the deep age is I'm thinking through this because it's when I'm looking up to the side. I'm looking at Aquaman. I have an Aquaman Funko Pop. This was before Batman vs. Superman came out. They released an Aquaman Funko Pop because there's short scenes in that movie where you see a snippet of what Aquaman is to look like in the DC Extended Universe. Originally, the Zack Snyder DC Extended Universe. But that's off topic. What does that have to do with this deep age that you're proselytizing? And, what's up with this anticipated difficult age prior to the deep age? The transitionary period. I think we're in it now. And I think things will remain to be difficult for the foreseeable future. No, foreseeable future. No, not accurate. I think things. See, I'm listening to myself and I'm saying, I think. I theorize, I hypothesize. Why do you think? Do you think? Because here's the thing: most people, and I don't recall where I got this from, but Google it, double check me. This idea that most of our thoughts, so to speak, our impressions, our ideas, they start from an emotional response. That's immediate. And then after that, we try and use our logic to justify our initial feeling, our initial emotional response, our emotional conclusion. We then try and use logic to justify it. We work backwards from whatever we felt like, not whatever makes sense, working to a conclusion, going from what we know. We go from what we felt instantly and try and find a way to logic between the two. And so as I'm looking at the epistemology, the what I believe and why, or more appropriately, what do I think? Think, such a broad term, so unspecific, so wrought with ambiguity. Ambiguity leaves you one way and then the other. See, one of my eyes opens more than the other naturally. It's my tendency. Makes me look disproportionately lopsided when viewed through video. See, it's interesting. These are things you don't think about until you're staring down the barrel of the camera every day. It's nice. It's interesting. It gives you perspective. Things are that simple. I believe, if I recall. There we go. I recall 2 or 3 episodes was complexity is the enemy of execution. And kind of the thesis of the pseudo thesis of that, behind that mantra, is the idea that for you to go through with any decision, you have a binary, simple choice you make. Anytime you take an action or decide to not take an action, you turned it into a simple 1, I'm going to do it, or 0, I'm not going to do it. It became simple. It became literally just blanket yes, blanket no. And not for all time, but in that instant. You make a decision for right then, even if your decision is I'm not going to do anything right now, or I'm not going to commit. It's yes or no on if I should do the thing that I'm choosing to do. And then you choose to do it, or you choose to do otherwise. Or you choose to not do it. And so likewise, everything comes down to that kind of simplicity. As much as we like to delude ourselves into thinking life is this mysterious web of contradictions and things, and I can just get lost staring into the deep blue ocean of it. I stare into the abyss and it stares back at me. Who said that? Some jagoff, I don't recall. Jean-Paul Sartre. He's French. You have to pronounce it all poorly and weirdly. Not a big fan of French pronunciations of, rather mundane, everyday kind of toiletries et des sommeliers et sommelier. Sommelier. Et it is a croissant. Yeah. So I think we've got a difficult age before us. Now I'm going to not get caught up on how I'm articulating myself, but get to the meat and potatoes of it. But first, let me see. Is there something there with the simple concept I didn't skip past yet? So people tend to think there's complexity and all this is rot. I think it's simple. I think we're in the hyper discordant stage where the reality is we're in a increasingly, I believe, infinitely polar world. Culturally, all sorts of ways. Now, there are common patterns that are coalescing, right? There's what's evolutionarily, I looked down, that was my tell, did you catch it? And so there are the things that I do think appear to be increasing and being more common. But most of those are, here's what I would say. I think the world is fundamentally so in general, you don't want to look at where things are. You want to look at what direction they're going in. So if I look at, there's these people and they're going that way, and these people and they're going that way, then I think they're going to get farther apart. And so I will adjust my understanding of what I believe things will go on to be in the next couple of weeks, months, years, right? What the trend will be. Trends, in my mind, tend to be a more useful way of starting when you want to gain perspective on something. It's pulling out and looking at trends, looking at where things are going. It was funny, I just got done listening to Terrence Howard back on Joe Rogan, but this time with Eric Weinstein. And No, what they spoke about was the idea, and I kind of align with Terrence on this, or I'm more sympathetic, I think, just off the jump, instinctually, to the idea that there aren't any straight lines in the real world, in the sense that if you look under an electron microscope, you can see jagged edges, right? And there isn't ever a straight line. It doesn't really exist. And likewise, he kind of said, what did he say? What were they saying doesn't exist? Oh, that nothing's ever still. Stillness is a concept, a fixed point. And so his understanding was that things can't be fixed points because there's no stillness in reality. But I think the counter to that was from Eric Weinstein was that if you take one thing and let's say you've got infinite particles and infinite stuff moving and it moves to another space, uh, there always needs to be at least one thing that didn't move because you're just saying there's infinitely many. So there's always, by definition, something that's not moving. Or let's say you have a ball, or I guess, I don't know, I'm explaining this in a way that's probably subpar, but there is always something if you have pieces of a thing that make up a thing, and if something's moving in any instant, there's one thing that's not moving. That could be the point everything's rotating about, right? Because, yeah, you could think about that. So if a ball is rotating, there is by definition a particle on the ball around, if you think about where it's rotating around, everything else is rotating around, but the particle at that exact spot is not moving. Now, you could say it's spinning into that motion if the ball's spinning, but if it's just spinning in air, I guess, I don't know. But the whole point of the argument was the idea that motion is a much more representative, it's a much more useful way to start if you're looking to have some sort of fundamental way you orient around things in relation to things is looking at their motion, the direction, where they're going, right? And where you're going in relation to them. And how's that, going to go on to be in the future? Looking at rates of change, looking at where people are going to be, calculus, this idea is much more intuitive, but also probably much more useful psychologically in orienting oneself, right? And so I see we're in a world, if we're looking at these rates and change and where things are going, we're currently in a world where things are spreading apart, but kind of society and people's expectations and what they think and their mental frameworks are based on a much more stable, much more predictable world. But I think, ironically, that human experience, let's say pre-1900 or even 1700 and before, I think that's very similar. Everyone had that experience. And then you have just right here, you have probably like 2 or 3 people's worth of time. Maybe like, kind of like 1890 to like 1980. Your life expectancy might be roughly the same. The idea that you go to school, there's a university, these kind of things, you get married and have the 2 kids, like whatever expectations and things people define as like that's what humans are like. No, that's what humans were like for a narrow window of 100 years that I think is unrepresentative of like it's like the least predictable, the least reliable thing. I think most of human history was probably relatively similar prior to that period, and most of human history is going to be, I think there's a little bit of a transition period this 20, 30 years right now. And then after that, most of human experience is going to be largely much more consistent. But I think we're in that transition period, and there was a slow transition, not slow in the sense that it didn't happen over a tiny piece, and it happens relatively fast in the span of hundreds of thousands of years. But if you're looking at the stability year to year, month to month, I think it was relatively stable period at the beginning of that transition, that maybe that, the last 100 years, right? And then you're going into this next kind of like, like maybe like, let's say 1980, 1990, 2000, this internet until probably 20, 30 years from now. So 2050, right? So take that 50-year period. So you had a 100-year period, then probably a 50-year period. These are all rough approximates. But I think that kind of 50-year period that you're looking at, that's where you're going to predict a lot of, that's the difficult time that I'm talking about. Now, in what sectors is it difficult and how long? And does the difficultness change? Can you end the difficultness sooner as your personal experiences relates to your day-to-day life and yourself existentially? I think society generally will be in this I think that's what it is. I think, to use a metaphor, I think human civilization is going through a midlife crisis. I think it started buying the Ferrari and having a fun time for the last 100 years, but now we're at the point where like, are we getting divorced? What about the kids? Like, that's where we're at. So that's where I think we're at. But I think, that's collectively, and that's probably not everyone, but most people. And I think everyone probably over the next 20, 30 years who's like alive and like not just like sitting in a nursing home is probably going to be going through that to an extent. There's a lot of big existential questions about how do we interface with other people? What is the purpose of doing anything? And increasingly, with artificial intelligence, these things happen where, let's say in 20 years from now, they're able to reverse aging. They already can kind of do it in rats. They can just flip a button and undo 20 years of aging, so to speak, right? I could be wrong in the timeline of what that is with rats. I most certainly am wrong. But the concept is there is biological mechanisms that they're starting to find in animals in the same way that like Ozempic, which is a GLP agonist, I believe is the term, they found in, I believe it was Gila monsters, which are these big lizards, right? That they don't eat for these long extended periods of time. And it's because they release this chemical which downregulates their hunger, right? And that was this GLP agonist. And though it's a totally random thing in an animal, they figured out, oh, there's a similar pathway and mechanism biologically in humans. And so they just did 1-to-1, of course, with some testing in between. And right now we're only like probably the third generation of these drugs, right? As of recording. But it's just interesting to see that, like, oh, and so they're finding similar things when it comes to reversing aging in other mammals. And so that's where, you can see these things. But let's say you do get to a world where 20, 30 years from now, you can click a button and it becomes really cheap to just like reverse your age. And you don't need to work out to have muscles and to have the health benefits. You can just take a pill, or you can have some, genetic modification or, therapy, something like that. And so that's very interesting. But let's say, once you get to that world where you've got AI, you've got stuff like that, and it's kind of like dying of natural causes is a choice. And even if you do die, you could probably have your entire consciousness instantly, if you have a Neuralink chip, port into a new body, and then it walks out of whatever place, almost like car rental place, where just your new body walks out, right? All sorts of stuff like that. Like, I think we're proper going to be in sci-fi territory. I think we're proper going to be there. And so how do you deal with those questions societally? And I think the funny thing is, no matter what, when you talk about AI and you talk about what things do people want and what things, as things become less and less, in music, they talk about music becoming more and more homogenized, right? Everything's the same. It's quantized. Everything's using the same beats, the same chord progressions, the same vocal hook writing pattern. A, B, A for the chorus, let's say, right? Or A, B, C, right? And the lyrical content is all getting homogenized and things increasingly, but I don't see that actually being the thing. I think that's a macro trend, right? For the things that everyone sees, yeah. I think the real trend is everyone's getting more and more unique and more specified. And in that, you can say, well, eventually you'll be able to type into AI exactly what you want to hear and it'll be able to create it. But really, the thing is, people don't like what can be done for them. They like what you can do for them. People don't like what can be created. They like what you can create. There's a distinction, right? So you look at the fact that like almost every single famous business owner or famous person who then spins off a business because they're famous and they can drive sales to it as long as it's a decent product and or service, right? Those people, their social media has hundreds and thousands of millions of followers. Another thing doesn't. Do you think anyone would be paying attention to Mint Mobile if Ryan Reynolds didn't own it? See, the whole thing is we want people. That's what we actually connect to and care about. That's what gets us motivated, And so I think that's the thing is increasingly the homogenized stuff that can be enjoyed by everyone, great. But everyone still wants the story of the person who made the thing that everyone loves. Who are you listening to? They don't want, you get what I'm saying? They still want, no, I'm listening to this artist. Who are you wearing? Right? That's a thing. What shoes? Those are the Jordans. You know what I mean? Even if they make a robot that can jump higher than Jordan, it's the fact that it's a person. It's a story. It's baked in. It's implicit narrative. It's, it's gods and monsters. It's the kind of stuff that Jordan Peterson talks about, the archetypal monomyths, right? These different ideas and the variations on them and the interaction between them, and then what type of music do they make, and then how's the evolution of their career as a fan, right? Like David Bowie. David Bowie is someone who I love in spite of the music most of the time, because he's only got like 10 good songs and the rest are really not good, or they're not worth me listening through to find the good stuff. And I don't think he's particularly like talented as an artist. I think in the sense that I don't think he's like, oh, he's the world's greatest singer, or he has a great way of singing. He has a unique way of singing, which is good. And now he's dead, of course, so. But on that point, I think it's at the act of being an artist. That's what makes him so endearing, and you love him and you want to follow what he's doing and his evolution. It's not because it's perfection, or even it's the most effective music, right, in terms of inspiring emotion. But that's the thing, is the fact that a human made it and there's that story makes it effective. The fact that I can actually go see him, not a robot him, not a hologram him, that I could see an artist perform. That's the human connection. That's the deep psychological thing, unless they can invent a pill for that, which I think maybe they can. But I still think on some moral level, people want to connect to other people. And so you could, yeah. So I think that's where really we're entering into the deep age, because people want a deeper connection. And now that everyone's becoming more existential to a certain extent and having to grapple with those things, I think everyone's kind of going, what is my life? What am I doing here? There's less knowns and there's more unknowns. And so it used to be in the past that, well, you want to have money and you want to be able to buy a house. And so you're going to go to college, and then you're going to be able to work a job that'll let you do that. But now it's like, you go to college, unless you're a doctor and engineer, you're not going to be able to buy a house forever, or have kids and take care of them, right? So it's like, well, then what do I even want? Did I want a wife and kids? Do I want to take care of them? And then you look at, do I want to get married, right? Whether you're a guy, whether you're a gal, like whatever's happening. And so you got everyone kind of having to juggle. You've got most people, water break. 1, 2, 3, 4. Woo! You've got everyone having to juggle with this kind of existential stuff. And then you've got the realization that people want to connect to humans. That's why all in the social media profiles, Gary Vee has like 1 billion, and then his companies have like 100,000. Right? People care about people. They connect with people. They buy a person. They buy a story about themselves. They're buying themselves if they're buying the story of a product, right? It's all about stories and narratives and people. You're never going to escape that. And increasingly, the only value you can have in society, it seems, as a business, increasingly in lots of businesses, and probably 20, 30 years from now, is what is the personality? What is the brand? What is the person? And then what do they endorse? I suspect in 30 years, there won't be a faceless company. For most things, there won't be faceless companies, because whichever version is Kim K or Paris Hilton or some famous person or some person of some level of notoriety, right? That's going to be the resource people choose to go to. That's the one. People, connection, a story, social status and connection, and I'm wearing this because I support this cause, or I like this person, or the way they relate to this other person, the collaboration between these two people. That's what it's all about, and I want to show that to other people. I want to be seen. I want to see and be seen, right? I want to love and hate and be loved and be hated, right? That's what people want, if you're talking psychologically. Now, if you get into, I don't want to get into like, but then you go like, what if you take away your psychological wants and you choose what you want? Well, at that point, okay, it's a whole different discussion. But let's say for the next 20, 30 years, people are going to be what they're going to be like for the most part in terms of psychology. Human psychology is not going to change. Our evolved proclivities, attraction triggers, wants, psychological, you know, the baseline is going to stay relatively similar. I think you get to that deep age, but right now I think we're in the turmoil. And I think rock music in particular has a turmoil because people are having to learn the hard way. Like in other forms of music, they go, I want to build a fan base, be big, and be successful. I think so originally you had labels, and labels had their eye on how do we make you successful? They were the ones asking that question. And so they would see a producer, like a good audio engineer and mixer and stuff, and they would see good, talented artists, bands, and they would say, let's put these people together and let's engineer the smartest way for them to guarantee they're going to be able to build an audience. And that was get exposed to the local crowd, put the music out on the radios, you have them go on the radios, do interviews or whatever, right? All that kind of stuff. Get CDs in the record store, get people to go to the record store to buy the record so that more people, see the record, to publicize that. And that was kind of a way to build a community, get exposure, to get reach. Reach now is not in the physical. The physical is a way to capitalize on an already cultivated audience, right? People who already are into what you're doing and want to check it out. Now the way to get to people is through the internet, is through media, is through personality and being connected to. That's why it's so easy for anyone who's got a platform for being an entertainer or YouTuber or whatever thing, influencer. It's because people generally go, I ride with this guy. I like this person. I like this chick. I like whatever, right? And so then they see when you have a business or a product, they see that as an opportunity to actually like support you. And so if I'm following someone and I really like what they're doing, jeffwhatever.com, I like Jeff. I like Jeff Bread. Oh, Jeff Bread, he's the best. And then he goes and launches his bread line, and his bread company is the same price or only $1 more than the normal bread I like, but it's just as good, has everything I like about it, same nutritional content, same flavor profile, or close enough. I'm going to buy Jeff bread every time because Jeff is my boy. I like Jeff. I support Jeff. I like what he's doing. I like them as a person. And everyone who doesn't like Jeff isn't going to hop on. But then at a certain point, once Jeff becomes beloved and the people who actually do like Jeff and do resonate with them, they start telling everyone how cool Jeff is. And it gets to a certain critical threshold where now, boom, escape velocity. Now to like Jeff is just to be another cool person, because everyone you hear talk about Jeff Bread is like it's the coolest thing. And so you think, oh, well, I'm going to be a Jeff Bread. You're going to hop on the bandwagon, try and be like into the cool thing, because everyone wants to like whatever's cool, right? Especially people below, I would say, what is it? 130, or no, is it 130 IQ or is it 120? The IQ distribution, I believe, is I forget where the middle is. I think it might be 90. Um, I'm totally mistaken on that. But the standard deviation is 15, and approximately outside of two standard deviations, I believe is 1/6 above. It might be 1/6 below. It's been a while since I did statistics, but it's something like that. And so basically, I'm saying that the bottom like 5/6 of the population definitely are very susceptible to that. I think the top 1/3 in IQ are much more idiosyncratic. And I think, yes, I think there's lots of different behaviors. I think you've got the people who are upper middle, they've got different characteristics than the people who are the lower middle. I think the lower middle are trying to chase the upper middle and whatever preferences they have. I think the upper middle want to be hip and they want to be on the cutting edge. The cutting edge often comes from here or randomly throughout here, but usually there's someone in the like 1/6, this top 6 of IQ, and then there's the 1/3, 1/3, 1/6. I could be wrong in the ratio there, but it's something like that. And so, you've got the people who are like the pretty smart. You've got the upper middle, the lower middle, and the unintelligent. And I think these people are like there's an IQ cutoff that the military says we won't hire you or bring you on because there's nothing you can do that wouldn't be counterproductive in the sense that we couldn't even have you be a janitor because you would mess up the floors and break all the equipment, and it would cost us more money and take us more time to clean up your mess than just not having you come work with us at all. So that's 1 in 6 people. That's a shocking amount. Now, they're probably distributed. They probably all find each other, and smart people find each other. And so their expectations of what a dumb person is probably, I'm smart, I hang out with smart people. So my definition of dumb is upper middle intelligence, right? And likewise with dumb people that all kind of coalesce into some sort of alcove. I don't even know where you find dumb people like that, in an alcove. And those people, their perception is just the guy right above them is like, wow, that guy's really smart, even though he's probably lower than average intelligence still, right? He's lower middle, that 2/3 of the chunk. And so, ain't that peculiar? And so, yeah, you think about some of these ideas, you slap them together. Woo, having a hard time breathing today. Allergies, people. I did my sinus rinse and sprays. Allergies, people. We'll talk about allergies. So let's talk about it. Let's break it down. Yes, but I think we got the difficult age. The difficult age. Oh, so here's the thing. So it's people and brands. So it's Jeff Brett. So I think the dynamic is that the people who like you and the people who aren't going to like you, they're going to see you at first. You need to be loud, loud, loud. And basically, you're just publicizing who you are already. Who you are. Publicize, 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 publicize. The people who like you, the 1 in 20 or the 1 in 100 who like you, are going to come to you. And the 1 in 1,000 who really like what you have to say, they're really going to stick to you and champion you. Everyone else is going to shit on you and not look at you and be a hater, or just be apathetic, which is totally fine, or just think it's corny and embarrassing. Good for them. And what happens is over time, you do that, you build that, you find more and more of those people out of the 8 billion people in the world. You start to get a bigger and bigger audience of those people. And then it eventually gets to a point where people come back and they get to revisit you. And now they're like, well, actually, now I kind of like him. And then you're collaborating with people they like. And so they get more endeared to you. They want to actually try and find a way to like you because they like that guy. And you're like, you know what? This is a cool thing to be into. And then eventually, before you know it, you get to a critical mass where everyone wants to like you because you're big, so to speak. Or they at least err on the side of not dissing you, as it would cause them grief and make them seem like an outcast. And so, yeah, so that's kind of the dynamic of that. But I think the difficult period we are in right now is with rock. We don't have a lot of the people of this new generation kind of popped off yet. And so I do my conceptualization would be that the difficult period, the way you get out of that is, like I'm kind of saying, is you have the 2,000 listeners a month or like whatever it is for me, right? Or 2,000 listeners an episode. And so if I get to that point, I'm able to do this full time. I make as much money as I would like being an engineer. You know what I mean? So if you're making as much money as being an engineer, some highly paid profession, doing rock music and podcasting, and really the main thing is building the audience first, because then I can attach the band and the music and I can perfect, kind of, I have ideas and I have things and I try and do them now just myself, but that's not smart. Really what I want to do is I want to do the record label if they were here today, or if you had someone taking the mission of a record label, which is I want to make rock artists that are big and successful. That's my goal. So what I see is, okay, the way you do that is you build up the personal brand of the people involved. You build up their personal brand. Step 1, don't do anything else until you do that. Everything else is for fun, but the actual work, the actual thing that's going to move the needle, step 1 is build the personal brand. Once it's that replacement, right? Once it's the amount of money generated from whatever podcast, whatever TikToks, whatever the medium through which you're growing your personal brand, once that personal brand is grown to a sufficient level, then you have money. Now you have time, space, you have an audience, you have a platform, you have leverage. You have something that other people want. You're valuable. Once your personal brand gets to the, whatever the threshold is, for me, it's 2,000 listeners an episode. You're valuable. I don't mean that you can command money from advertisers, which you can. That's a way to demonstrate that you are valuable, is that, I've got a sizable audience that's enough and it's reliable enough that that advertisers say it's worth giving you money because I'll make even more money by reaching your audience. defining, it's proof that you have leverage, that you have value. And so at that point, you can go to producers and engineers and songwriters and get them on board with what you're doing, either saying, hey, you're going to get exposure. I'm going to bring you on the podcast, let's say 7 times over the next 3 years, right? And you're going to get exposed to the audience. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And now that I actually have some money, I'll maybe give you like $1,000 for the album, even if it's not much money up front because we're still growing. It's like now you can actually, you have a little bit of money to play with, right? You can also get them, to a wider audience and help them network and work with other artists, right? And of course, whatever cut of like songwriting credit they get if they do songwriting, right? And so all of those things, you can get those people involved. And it's a much better idea than spending, let's say for me, let's say it takes 2 years to get the podcast to 2,000 listeners an episode, and then I start doing that. It will probably take me 2 years straight to get decent at producing music by myself and writing songs by myself and recording everything by myself. But it's stupid, because what I could do instead is grow the brand, get to the point where I have the leverage and everyone wants to be me and I'm doing it full time, because now I have all the free time to get really good at it, but also I can get the people who are really good to work with me, get good music made, put it out there, keep rinsing and repeating. And now that I know these people and I have a good relationship with them, I can have them teach me everything. I don't have to figure it out and refigure out everything. They already know it. They can just teach me. And probably within a couple weeks to months, you'll be good. Instead of spending 2 years, 3 years, 3 months. You want to think about, it's not how to avoid learning things. It's how do I spend the least time to get the same outcome? If I can gain the same knowledge from like 1/3 the input, good. Right? So think about that. So that's the way I would do it as a band, is first you build a personal brand, because now you can sell anything. When I say sell, now you can actually introduce people to anything. And the value you bring is by having the story, having the narrative, being a person, being someone they can relate to, someone they could be interested in. Now there's a reason to buy that thing outside of just the value of whatever thing they're buying. Now there's a reason to listen to that song instead of just it's a good song, because there's infinite good songs. But I think the only ones I'm going to listen to, especially in a genre like rock, which isn't going to be like the most mass listened to thing, like I don't think everyone's going to be listening to the same thing. And if they are, it's going to be the most homogenized, the most broadly listened to, the most broadly palatable stuff, like Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's good. And someone's going to do that. But I think if you look at rock, it's not rock's place. I don't think that's what it's going to be. And I think almost every other genre is going to be like that too. So I think what's interesting is you're going to see that rock, there's going to be infinite good rock songs that you can listen to, but the ones that people are only going to listen to for the most part are the ones that are actually going to be like changing what the sound of rock is the ones that have a story, have a band, there's a narrative, they want to listen to them. There's a reason there's a resurgence of Nickelback and Creed. As much as they love kicking someone who's on top, people love a comeback. Literally, Higher by Creed was the same exact song if you listened to it 7 years ago. The song didn't change. The narrative around the people changed. The personal brand, people have become endeared to the brand. Think about that. I believe the only reason people is going to listen to music, beside it being good, but everything's going to be good. So that's not the reason they're listening to it over other things. It's opportunity cost. It's look at as opposed to what. I think the reason people are going to listen to music, and I think they're only going to listen to music where there's a story because of the person. That's all they're going to care about. I was listening to this band, and they're interesting, and they sounded like an exact kind of like rip-off of the Arctic Monkeys to me. But to me, I didn't know their story, and I just go, I would never listen to this over Arctic Monkeys. First off, because I thought the composition was a little shoddier. But the main thing was, that wasn't my problem, though. My problem was I thought, I don't think they have a story, because these lyrics sound like copy-paste. They sound like they put them in here That's the thing. Like Eminem, there's so much character to those lyrics. There's so many personal idiosyncrasies and choices that are, you know what I mean? That like, it's a human, it's a person. You hear the evolution over the albums. Like it's the story, it's the narrative. That's all it is. That's all it's going to be in music increasingly, unless you're like the one of the two biggest people in the world. Beside that, it's going to be the story and the narrative. That's going to be what drives people to listen. So start there. That's the first thing. Before you can do anything, before anyone will ever want to listen to your music, they want to listen to you. No one will be interested in your music unless they're interested in you. Now, if your lyrics and your music sounds very interesting, that can be the way they get interested in you, but most times it's not going to be. Unless you're like Polyphia, no one's heard it. But now that everyone's heard Polyphia and 1,000 different versions of it, them putting out a new Polyphia song does not make them interesting. Does not make anyone interested in them. People are interested in Polyphia. The only reason they care about the songs is because of, oh, how is the band changing? How does it say about them as people? What does it say about the relationship between them as people? That's why they're there. It's all soap operas. It's all reality TV, and it always was. It's always been The Real Housewives. It's always been The Bachelor. It's always been Naked and Afraid. All of human civilization. Stories. People work hard because of the story they tell themselves about themselves. I'm a person who worked hard. What does that say about me? What does that say about me in relation to other people? What's that story I tell myself? Is it that I'm better than you? Because I am more intense than you, or I work harder than you? See, this is a fallacy that working hard means you have higher outcomes, right? Because let's say the guy who makes $100 million, the guy who makes $30,000 a year, right? Let's say they both have to sleep at least 6 hours a day. Let's say they both start out by working 12 hours a day. That's our baseline, right? Okay. This guy makes 100 million, this guy makes 30,000. Let's say this guy works 1.5 times as much as that guy. Is that going to give him the 10,000, 100,000 multiple in income? No. It's going to give him 0.5. So it's not working more. It's not working harder. It's all about what you're doing in those same 12 hours. It's what you're doing. So that's where it's simple. People get existential about money. Business is complicated. All these things are complicated. That may be true. But always start from the rates of change, the directions, where things are going, what direction they're going in, and what can be made simple. What can you say for certain? I can say for certain that guy's not working 100,000 times more than the guy who makes 30 grand a year. He's not working 100,000 more hours a year. He doesn't have that much more time than him. You have fixed time. Time is fixed. So clearly, that's not the way. And I'm using money as a proxy for success in any endeavor you want. I want to bring back rock music. I want rock culture to be alive. I'm not going to achieve that by working hard. Working hard is great. It will help, but it is not what's going to make it happen. It's being intelligent. I don't mean you have to be a genius. I mean you have to be able to step back, simplify as many things as you can to things you can say for certain. Look at what things, how they're going, say what you can for certain, and then say, this is the end goal, work backwards. End goal, work backwards. If you start with, okay, $100 million, how do I do it? and you go, okay, the fastest growing, most sustainable brands in the world are built off of a personality of a celebrity. Why is that? Oh, it's because of the story and it's because of the recognition. And then once it gets to a certain threshold of critical mass, it's unstoppable. As long as they just do as good as everyone else in the industry. So they don't have to be innovating at all even. They can just do just as good. Well, how do you get there? You become known. How do you become known? What ways are most reliable? Well, it's being consistently accessible to people so you can build that relationship. You have a foundation. And then it's specific things to get exposure. You need to be exposed to people and preferably exposed in a way that people view you favorably. Or the people who you need to have view you favorably will view you such. Because that doesn't mean you need to go around and like pretend to be a different person to not offend anyone, but it does mean that like you don't need to be needlessly incendiary and offensive, right? But you also don't want to be neutered, right? Because if you're neutered, no one cares. It doesn't work. They're not connecting with you. You need to be you, but there's a version of you who, if your neighbor's kid is over and you guys are having a barbecue, you don't swear and drop the F-bomb because there's people around. Because they don't want you swearing in front of their kids, and you don't want to swear in front of their kids because that's up to them if they want, you know what I mean? It's just a respect thing. But you're not being fake by not swearing right then. And if you are, it's to a very minute degree. So like right now, I'm not saying all of the bad words. You may have picked up on that. Is that because I've never said them before? No. Is it because I will never say them again? Also, no. It's because I would rather be less incendiary, and it keeps me more focused. It keeps me focused and on task, and keeps my mind clear, more direct. I don't go off on tangents saying grotesque, kind of things that most people would characterize as like that's potty humor or like teenage boy humor. And not because I think there's anything wrong with those. And I think silliness and having fun is a very important thing, or at least for me in my mental, like that's an important thing for me in life. Kind of a thing that's a non-negotiable. But likewise, that means, but I can also recognize what is useful. I can say simply, I would have an easier time podcasting and reaching people and getting done what I want to get done if I choose to be the person who's not swearing and telling bathroom humor jokes, however funny they may be to me. And so I worked backwards, and so the way it seems to me is if the goal is to get rock back, and it's like, how do you work smart to do that? Well, guaranteed if I blow myself up, well, good, now I'm a full-time musician, which is fun for me, but it's step one, right? Like I said, if someone else has a podcast and they're almost there, hit me up. I'll help you as much as I can to get you to the stage where you blow up first, or whoever, because then we can start putting people on the map. And then we can start working with producers, working with these people, learning the things, putting other people in connection with them, getting collaborations going, getting these people on podcasts, getting everyone else to build their platforms. Because once everyone else is building their brands, it's so easy for someone else to launch a brand and to become a commodity. It's so easy for them to become a reality TV star. You know what I mean? This idea of an influencer, a micro celebrity. You're here for the gossip. You're here for the drama. You want to hear about what I do in the dark. You don't. You don't. I get lost. I can't fumble around for the light switch. I think you guys like that noise. Well, there we go. Look at that. This is a proper episode. This is a proper episode. So what was the main point? You work smart. To me, it's you blow up the brand and then you go from there. Because there you really can't go wrong, especially if you're a smart person. But here's where I make it simple. I don't need to have everything in stone planned out for what the next step is. Now I'm going to work that out, like the next like immediate steps, just so that when I'm pitching people, like, come here, it's going to be worth it. You will not regret listening to this podcast and getting me to that 2,000 listeners an episode point and listening for 5 minutes a day and sending it to 5 people. You're not going to regret that, because once I get to that point, here is how we really kick it to the point where I am putting people on the map. I am on the map and I'm putting other people on the map. And we're getting this done. And I'm not doing it in a way where I'm trying to like make money off everyone. Like, sure, like let's say we do a podcast like studio or podcast company, right? / record label thing. Like, you would probably take like whatever money you need to do, like let's say we're going to put producers working on people's podcasts. Okay, well, we would need to take out at least whatever money it costs to pay the producer for that episode. But the whole thing you want to set up, and this is the reason you're not trying to actually take that much money from them. Yeah, so by the nature of it, the goal is not to, first off, if I hit that replacement value, I'm making more than enough money for me for the rest of my life. Like, I'm good. Second off, I could launch a business off of that after a couple of years once it's at a really big stage where I've got like 200,000 followers. Okay, but that's not the point. The point to say is, what I can say simply is it makes sense to get to that stage for me, and then I'm thinking through it right now. What's the next thing you would do, right? And so I want to have this kind of thought out before I record that pitch that's going to go at the front of these videos, and then I'm going to go to TikTok and tell people and get them to come listen to the podcast. So what is that thing? So what's the next thing? So there's 2 things, and it's what do you do and what percent of both, if you do them at the same time, do you do? There is podcasting more. There is working with producers and doing music, which is fun for me and which is good because then I'll have some baseline music that I can be proud of that's better mixed than the stuff I have right now that's more commercial, can be more widely enjoyed by people, because I can get really crazy and really esoteric doing like jazz, prog, rock, folk, country, metal, rap. Like I could combine every genre if I wanted to and get real nerdy and esoteric with it. That is stupid. Starting out, at least for certain. But also, like, the bread and butter is going to be stuff that's good that people will like, broadly speaking. And then I can do other stuff in addition, but it can never replace doing things that actually are, I think, are good and almost, with some certainty, at least 30% of people who are fans are going to love. Like, that's the baseline. I can do crazy stuff that only like 5% of people are going to like in addition. So I think starting out, but there isn't a benefit to where it's like, I think that the thing is, once you get that podcast growth to the point where it's full time, you want to grow it really, really big. Right. And so it's, how do you do that? Is part of that getting some really good kind of hit songs written that then add credibility. So it's like, oh, you're that guy with that really good song. Okay. And now you're collaborating with these influencers and these different people. And so who are those people? And I think the real thing is, I think you just look at who has a platform, who has good connections, who already is. And that might not be music people, because right now I found Tape Notes is a podcast, and they literally have on freaking Phineas and Charlie XCX and Damon Albarn from Blur and all of these people who are ultra, ultra famous and successful and great interviews, and they get like no views. It's because people don't know to look for that in the algorithm, and there isn't enough of a scene built up for the podcast yet. That's my prediction. And so I think starting out, it's probably going to be just influencers. So if it's comedians, if it's fitness people for me, if it's, whoever, getting those people on, getting them talking about rock music, getting them talking about at least whatever type of music they like, and hopefully introducing them to some rock music, giving them some recommendations if they don't know stuff, right? Getting on some older people in the music industry. No, actually, no. I mean, that might be fun, but I think the real thing is going to be, so here's the thing. Yeah, actually, here's what it is. So it's double down on podcasting. I'll do some songs on the side. I'll get that set up with a producer or two, and we'll work on that. And so the thing is going to be, here's what it's going to be. It's going to be get something working with the producer, get some songs going. Great, that's all good. That's not to have them go super viral. It's just to have really good music to show to people. Now, if you can get them to go viral, I'm going to keep making TikToks probably all the time after the fact to get them to go viral eventually. Or at least do really well so that when people check it out, they go, oh, Black Licorice is really good and the podcast is really good. Oh, his intro song, it's that viral song I hear. Oh, that's his song? Oh, okay, good stuff, good stuff. Oh, New Rock Dynasty, that's the record label podcast. I forget what the name is, but podcast, like network. Like, okay, cool. Okay, wait, they got this fan club website thing where bands and people can make their own accounts and talk about stuff, and bands can post about what shows they have going on and all this kind of stuff. And oh, they're eventually going to add like a rewards thing with stores. Like, okay, that's cool. But we don't need to get into that. That stuff's later. The Amex of rock and roll. Rock and roll rewards. Get them today. That's later. That's not really a present concern. But so the real thing is going to be get the music going, get people with established audiences, with podcasts, with TikTok followings. You know, something like you could say someone like Bradley Martin from Raw Talk or whatever his podcast is called. Pardon Bradley if that's, I mean, no offense. And so, yeah, so it's probably going to be that. It's just going to be like network now and seriously get on the biggest and just keep going. A podcast a day like is going to continue. And so I might as well get on a guest a day. And you can look at it like someone like Joe Rogan gets a person on every single, day pretty much. And that's because that's where he's at now. But even like, earlier on, like I don't think it's going to be insane to get someone on each day. Even, sometimes you'll have the same person reoccurring. You'll have reoccurring guests. And eventually, yeah, especially. So here's the thing is, yes, it's get on the big people and really start growing it. Go from 2,000 listeners a day, try and get it to 10. And then I would say once a week or maybe twice a week, having a small artist. But I want a majority of the episodes to be with like big people. And at that point too, then if I need to, I can hire a producer who can edit the videos and who can do production on stuff, and we can put them out a day after, because then that gives us time to record a podcast whenever it's convenient for the guest. And then we can do whatever post-production we need to do and then put it out the next day at like 3 p.m. or something, 3 p.m. Pacific, which would be 6 p.m. Eastern. And so that might be a really good idea, right? And then so we say, yeah, so we do 7 podcasts a week and then maybe 6 or no, 7 podcasts a week, because even if I want to take a day off and I'm busy, if I'm traveling or something, flying someplace to do an interview, then at that point, you just do multiple in the same day, right? And so that's what I'll say is no matter what, I think it's having 2 smaller artists on, 2 people who we need to break each week, and 5 people who are established. As we work up, so eventually it's going to get to the point where it's going to be 5 people who are like proper, like famous, successful, already have an audience, even if it's only like 10,000 followers on YouTube. But if it's like 10,000 listeners, it's like, get that person on. So get people on. 5 of them are going to be proper established influencers. And then 2 out of 7, 2 episodes per week is going to be getting musicians, rock people who are starting out, like even like I'll go to people who I know now who are like smaller, who I like, but I'll get them on once it's big. You know what I mean? So that'll be fun. But also, yeah, message me. Like, message me on Instagram. Message me. I don't even know how Twitter messages work. But message me on everything. You can find me. Comment if you're watching this on YouTube. Wherever you're watching this, comment. Go there. Check the description of the video. If it's on Spotify, you'll see my info. You can see where my Instagram is and type that in. But yeah, so that's going to be the plan, is get the podcast to 2,000, then really amp up the production quality, get bigger guests, and just keep going. Because that's the thing is, even if they're medium famous people, times, let's say 5 times 4 weeks in a month, that's 20 people a month. Yeah, and so let's say 1% of everyone who like is a fan of them, who watches, let's say it's 10,000 people. Let's say they have 10,000 people who watch their videos regularly, right? 1% of 10,000. 1% of 100 is 1. So 2 more zeros is 100 people. Okay, let's say 100 people. If the average audience size is 10,000, we get 100 people who subscribe and start listening each episode. Times 10 is 1,000, times 2 is 2,000. So every month, let's say we gain an extra 2,000 listeners, it doubles. Now, the nice thing with that is the amount of money that's generated is now doubled, is going up by a lot each month. And the nice thing with that is now we could actually build a record studio. We could build a building. I could buy a property, not me, but the company can actually buy buildings, and we can start building stuff after 3 months. And now you're at the point where the podcast has, even if it just has 6,000 listeners on average a day, you're at the point where you're making, that's a big amount of money. You could put the down payment on a building. You can start, you put the down payment on a building. That's if you need it. But that point, then you can look at what is the next step in terms of infrastructure, in terms of things. Yeah, it's interesting. But it's clear that the first step is get this to 2,000 listeners, right? I'm going to say sell it on the mission first, because those people are going to come every day. If you believe in that mission, you want to bring back rock, and you want it to not skip a generation, you want it to happen now, you want there to be a platform for bands to get blown up and for them to become a platform for them to blow other people up, come here. It'll be done in less than a year. Because if you listen to what I just said, even if like that's half as successful, the podcast, instead of gaining 2,000 listeners a month, let's say it gains 1,000 listeners a month. After a year, that's another. You go from 2,000 listeners an episode. After a year, it's at 14,000 listeners an episode. Let's say it's the 2,000 a month. Well, then it's 26,000 listeners after a year. That's every single episode, 26,000 listeners. Probably 100,000 subscribers. That's probably you know what I mean? So at that point, if I have someone on, once a week for 2 months in a row, who's a music artist, who's an up and coming, who's working with one of our producers, and that's me getting them popular and successful. And then as they blow up, we put them in touch with, and we get them bigger guests on their podcast who've been on our podcast. Now you're really starting to see this thing blow up. And that's after a year. Not only are we a platform we can break people, we can establish them as their own people too. Of course, it's up to the fans if they like them and who is going to be a fan of them. But assuming we pick people, and after the first month or two, we're starting to see something happen, we bring them on, the audience likes them, right? Because I will say, you don't want to you have to listen to the audience. Because like Kill Tony, it's interesting. The audience just decided they did not like Hans Kim, the comedian who's one of their, their guys who was there on every episode. The audience turned on him. But Tony keeps insisting he's really funny, and, so it's like, you don't want to shove things down people's throat. If people don't like someone, they don't like someone. And then you say, we gave an honest try, and their podcast is their business. And, we can still send them guests, you know what I mean? But I think at that point, you'd be like, okay, if you want to hire a producer, you can hire someone, but like, we're going to try and launch another podcast. So that's worst case scenario if it doesn't work out. But they still do have an audience of whoever would like them, right? Even if it's not our audience per se. But no, I don't think that'll happen, because I think really what's going to happen is you're going to hear my music. You're going to hear like, oh, he's like rock and roll, like anything from Olivia Rodrigo to Nirvana to Metallica to the Smiths. Like, I'm a pretty big bucket, and I think rock fans just like rock very broadly, like that too. I think they like that too. I don't think rock fans are super polarized in terms of what stuff, broadly speaking. I think there's a big band of rock fans who just like rock TM. Rock, broadly speaking, from indie to metal to blues. So, that's what's going to happen. We're going to grow the podcast to 2,000 listeners. We're going to start getting on medium-sized, but eventually big-sized guests, 5 of them a week, and then 2 small artists. So hit us up, small artists, if you want to be on the show. Okay? Hit us up. That's what's going to happen. But once the show starts really growing, then we're going to have money, or the company will. The company's going to have money. The company which I am in charge of will have money, and we will be able, that company being New Rock Dynasty. At that point, we will be able to do stuff. I haven't even figured out what that stuff is yet, but I know for certain it doesn't even matter because we'll be able to take the platform and actually launch other people. I mean, that's the number one priority. Yes. Yeah. But that's interesting. So that's where I'm leaving it for now. We're in the difficult spot, but I think we can get through the difficult spot, and then I think we'll be in the deep age where everyone's connected to a person because they like listening to their podcast and they like the story of the band, the story of the people in the band, and they have a deep personal connection with them. So in between albums, instead of feeling like, oh no, I hope they're not falling off, you're going to get an intimate, getting to see them again, getting to check up, getting to grow with them. Duh. That's what everyone wants. It's so obvious, but I can't believe people aren't doing it. It's because they're not they're not me. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're not like me. That's okay. You might be. And if you're like me, then we're going to have a fun time. Yeah, we're bringing back rock. Bringing back rock. We don't want to skip a generation. And I think we're on the precipice of an age. And I think it can happen within the next year. We can have a giant revival. Or it could be in 15 years from now. The choice is yours, young Padawan. Good evening and good night.